3rd. All right, this is how we will proceed today. We have just about 3 papers, and therefore we are going to stick to what we said yesterday. By the time we go for lunch, we'll have, wrapped up everything. So today we will start with a presentation from the British Institute in Eastern Africa, BIEA. That's by Rita Mwangi, who's a research manager there. We have a very close relationship with BIEA, partly because their boss is actually our colleague at Egerton University. That's Dr. Damaris Parsitao. And then after Ms. Mwangi's presentation, we will have the first and actually the final batch of paper presentations by Madam Valerie Kutima, The Right to Vote, Political Participations of Persons with Disabilities in Kenya, and Pauline Duta with citizen participation during the elections process. All these are colleagues from Egerton University. I don't want to say that we preserved the last day for people from Egerton University. We will also have one more presentation which will be done online, and we shall be guided in this session by none other than senior here, Karibu. And as you take your seats, I will then invite Rita Mwangi to come and talk to us. Do you foresee yourself becoming a politician in the near future, so that I just start saying what to, mkaribisheni kwa makofi?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Rita Mwangi, as Kyoko has rightly put it. I work at the British Institute in Eastern Africa. It's quite a mouthful, so most times we just say BIA, and you're welcome to use that for your reference. As he's also put it, I'm here representing Dr. Damaris Parsitao, who's been part of this forum in the last few years, as well as a member of staff of Egerton. She recently moved to be country director for the BIA just this July, and so we're just here to be able to talk about, it's not a presentation per se, it's more of how we can work together to, promote the research agenda. So as our work, as probably you've seen from the banner and from a little table that we have out there, we are a research institute for the humanities and social sciences, where we just try and promote the research agenda, help people to conduct it from, from the early stages of research to being able to distribute this research. And how do we do that? There are a couple of ways which we do that. And I'll talk about the different kinds of research categories that we have and how you can be able to position yourself, as a researcher, as a professional, as probably a student, and then hopefully for more questions we'll still be around for the entire day. So the first level of researcher that we deal with is someone that we call an honorary research fellow. And that person is somebody who has the BIA as the research institution or as the host institution for where their project is going to be based. So say, for instance, you're an independent lawyer right now and you apply for a good bid and you win it, and you're not attached to an institution or you're not attached to a university, then BIA can be your host institution. And in this capacity, then we will just be your host. We will offer you, a letter to say that you actually are part of us. The other way that we can work with you is when you're a collaborative researcher with that. And what does that mean? that you come from a different university, you come from a different institution, but you are probably partnering with one of our research active staff to take up a project together. In this sense, then BIA is an academic partner with you. It's also an administrative partner where we are able to run, you are able to run your project funds through us, and you're able to use the technical services of the project manager, the research managers, the finance team, the HR to be able to administrate your project. We then have, which could be more interesting to more people in the room, depending on the categories you fall in for even academics, we have thematic grants that we run once every year. These grants, they're in 3 categories. One, we have the postdoctoral writing grants, which give a stipend for anybody to be able to produce an article or a submission in the journal article, in the journals that we have. We have one journal which is called Azania. Azania is largely archaeological, anthropological by nature, so it wouldn't be maybe of your interest. But we have a different journal called the Journal of Eastern African Studies, where you could publish. We run it every quarter, so there's quite a lot of opportunity for you to be able to publish in that journal. We then have dissemination grants, where sometimes I know in the course of you guys doing your research, you go to communities sometimes, or you go to people. I've faced this before, where you are trying to do some research and then people say, but you never come back with this info, but we never know where this information goes. And sometimes it's not that we don't want to, it's maybe because in the communities we're working in, they don't have access to the places where we publish this information. And so we offer something called a research dissemination grant, where you go back to the communities, we give you a stipend to go back to the communities of interest to actually explain to them how their research is helping. And that not only helps you as a researcher, but you pave way for other researchers who are coming after you, so that when they come to those communities of interest, the communities know that researchers come back. They just don't collect data from us and disappear with it and publish it in places that we cannot be able to access. And the last kind of grant that we provide for the professionals is something that we call the thematic grants. So we run in a couple of themes. One is urban lives, and you could see them if you just go through our website. But for the interest of this conference, we have a theme called Technologies of Politics. And Technologies of Politics is just how general life in different interdisciplinary ways of the social sciences and humanities, then we're able to relate with politics. As I speak, we currently have a conference, we call it a graduate conference, where we have a lot of the PhDs and the master's students who are participating in a 2-day conference back at the BIA. And the theme is Political Competition and Democratic Elections in Africa, analyzing the past, present, and future prospects. So in a post-COVID world where we're able to connect even on social media, on Zoom, in a webinar, then this presents an opportunity where some of you here, in the academic world as experts in your own right, then you could first and foremost become keynote speakers in this thing. We are starting up a policy dialogues session every single month, where you'll then also be able to come and share your insights, your research, your findings that is going to inform policy. And lastly, you could direct, some of you who are in academia could direct your students there. It's peer support for them, even as they do their research, as they do their studies, as they conduct any level of research. So we run a thematic grant once a year, where we give you funding for as long as you're aligned to one of the themes. And clearly, as we can see it in the room, then we're aligned to one of the BIA's themes. Moving away from the professionals, then we go to probably what we'd look at as anybody who's a student. We have something called the Graduate Attachment Scheme, for people who've just finished their bachelor's and people who are in their master's program. You have a 3-month attachment in the BIA, where you get a stipend. You're attached to the researcher in our networks who's working in your interest area, so that we try and move away from the theory and go into the the practical way of doing this work. We also have an undergraduate volunteer program, which just targets those who are in undergrad. When they're on break, they can come through. They'll also get a stipend to facilitate their transport within Nairobi. We are an affiliation body. For us to be able to conduct research in Kenya, we know that we have to get the research permits from NACOSTI. And if you don't have a university or an institution which is able to do that for you, then you can be an affiliate of the BIA. How do we get access to all these opportunities? You'll start by a simple membership. So for students in Africa and from developing countries, then it's free. So feel free to go to our website. On the Join Us section, just register your details. You'll get access to all this information, to the events that we're going to be having, and all that. As I conclude, we run a couple of events in a month. We have something called a reading group, where they read texts. The scholars there read texts that are in line with our thematic areas. In addition to that, we offer Swahili classes. For any of you who's working with any researcher who's not from the continent or who doesn't speak Swahili, and probably you'd be working with them to go to mashinani, and they'd need a working language, then we offer like a mini crash course that allows anyone who's not conversant with Swahili to access this. We have a graduate forum, which meets every 2 times a month, or alternate Thursdays, where one, it's peer support for people who are in the PhD journey or aspiring to the PhD journey, so from masters onwards. But it's also a place where you can rely on the BIA's networks to be able to reach people who ordinarily you wouldn't reach on a day-to-day basis. So instead of waiting for Follap to happen next year for your keynote speaker to come, this is a good opportunity. You will have an opportunity where in the graduate forum, you could suggest that you want this speaker, and because our network has been built from the 1960s, then we most likely will be, not most likely, we will be able to get who you want. And in a Zoom world, in a webinar world, then that makes it easier, because then you can be able to access the people that you want. We can have different kind of sessions. You can have peer support for the things that you're doing. So whether you're a professional, whether you're a student, I invite all of us to just pass by our desk, pick up a goodie, and learn more about BAA, and probably that will be a chance for you to ask your questions then. Thank you. For your writing. When you put in your application for your writing, then you could be supported with some amount of money to help. So not exactly like to a university or pay your school fees or that kind of a thing, but maybe in your writing process. Another thing that we do is that because we're connected all across Eastern Africa and in UK, where we're registered as
What Rita forgot to tell you is that they're also providing sweets out there. So the sweets are free. Ndugu yangu, Mr. Kioko, you called the next group of speakers Egertonians. We from the University of Nairobi claim them as our own, because they are genuinely our own. So I will want to invite Robert Mutembe. Uko wapi? Wewe ni wa Parklands. Njoo hapa. Dada Valerie Karibu, Parklands. Then there is Alex. Alex is also presenting online, Parklands. So hawa ni watu yetu. Kuna mtu anaitwa Aaron. Aaron na Wahu. Muko? Ako wapi? Wahu. Karibu. As Wahu is readying herself. Wahu, are you ready? Aya, wacha mwalimu aanze. Kuwa tayari next. A hand of applause for mwalimu.
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you very much, Ogada. My name is Valerie Kutima, and I'm a lecturer at Egerton University Faculty of Law. I would like to present my paper. My paper is on the right to vote for persons with disabilities in Kenya, political participation. And with that, my first focus is on the question that I had while I was writing this paper is how do we determine, it's basically on decision making for persons with disabilities in voting. How do we determine the distinction between support to make a conscious decision by a person with the disabilities and making that decision for persons with disabilities? And how does this amount to equal recognition before the law? So my first, I would like to bring us to highlight Article 12 of the CRPD, which buttresses that states must reaffirm equal protection, equal recognition of persons with disabilities before the law. And with this, of course, states must take measures, certain measures to ensure that persons with disabilities have the right to vote in all the spheres, just as other persons with no disabilities. And so my paper is in I put it in 4 stages. I will discuss Kenya's obligations, but today we will not look at it that much. Implementation, how Kenya has implemented Article 12 of the CRPD, and domestication of Article 12. The substituted and supported decision-making process, which is the juice of my paper. And the last one is the theoretical framework, which I will not look too much into because yesterday Ms. Josephine looked at the same and she gave us, and our theories are basically the same. So on Kenya's obligations, of course, in Article 54, we have persons with disabilities. Then in the Elections Act, there's Section 3.1, and Persons with Disabilities Act, Section 29, talks about promoting their voting rights. That is basically it. So on the implementation of the CRPD, the IEBC regulations have come with 2 particular major areas in which they can assist persons with disabilities to realize their voting rights. One is that they can only vote in the presidential election. They cannot vote the 6 piece. They cannot vote for the senator, the member of parliament, the what, so and so. They can only vote for the president. And so automatically in my paper, I bring out the point that this in itself, this not being able to vote for the other candidates limits automatically their right to equal representation, equal recognition before the law. And so that was basically the implementation on Article 12. Then, of course, there's the BVR kits, which Madam Josephine talked about yesterday. You know, persons with amputees, so on and so forth, may not be able to be registered as voters due to these 1, 2, 3, 4 issues. The limbs, we could use the nose, we could use the eyes. so on and so forth. BVR kits are very limiting to people who have five fingers, or five limbs, so you know what I'm talking about. Then there's the decision-making process, which is the most important thing that I want to bring out in this particular paper. In the decision-making process, there are two decision-making processes. One, there's the substituted decision-making process, and the second one is the supported decision-making process. In the substituted decision-making process, this is whereby the focus is on the guardian. The focus is on the guardian of the person with a disability. So the guardian casts the vote for the person with a disability. The person with a disability is registered as a voter. But he himself, probably due to the severity of his disability, may not be able to comprehend the process of elections, and hence the guardian casts the vote for this particular person. However, in supported decision-making process, the guardian, or even IBC in their electoral awareness programs, they make this person with disability understand what is happening. These are the candidates, this is what is understood, this is what they are saying, this is the manifesto, the A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3. Who do you think would be the best candidate for you? And if you think that candidate A is the best, then please cast a vote for this candidate. I will be your representative, but you, the decision comes from you as the person with a disability. And so with this, 5 minutes, I'm talking too much. And so with this, I want to say that I want to bring up Australia. And in electoral laws in Australia, this was back in 2010, was that any person with disability, with a disability who has a guardian, that person automatically is, the severity of their disability is a bit too high, and so they're automatically expunged from the roll of voters, from the register of voters, roll of voters, potato, potato. And so, however, in a case of Roach versus the Electoral Commission, the court in Australia found that this was against the rights of persons with disability to vote, and hence they were not equally recognized before the law under Article 12. And so with that, of course, there's also the case of Budjoso versus Hungary, where the the Human Rights Committee said the same thing as the High Court in Australia. So the theoretical framework, again, as I said, we're looking at the social constructivism, whereby a disability is as a result of the social constraints that are there in the community. There's the one who is called Putnam, who also has some theories, but however, I have not conclusively completed that particular area, and I will in due time. With this being said, I invite comments rather than questions on my paper, and thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are pressed for time. Yesterday was Sergeant drill action. Today it's Major General activity. Nduta, ulingo ni wako. Dakika 10. Karibu.
Good morning. You're good. So my name is Pauline Duta. I'm a student taking bachelor's in LLB at Egerton Law School, and my paper is on citizen participation during the electioneering period. Now, with the forthcoming FIFA, I'm tempted to start my presentation with a common quote that most of you, I guess, you're familiar with if you're a football lover, that a team is only strong as at its weakest link. I hope you know that quote. It's a common. So in my paper, I'm applying it in the sense that the vitality of any democratic state can be ascertained by how the citizens come out in numbers to vote, because you know, numbers don't lie. And if the turnout of the voters is high, we can say that the democracy of that particular state is thriving. But when a state or a democratic state in that matter records a very low turnout, and then there is deeply a problem that we need to deal with it in urgency. Now in my paper, I'm looking at it, citizen participation from a youth perspective. I want to give you insights because I'm a youth. I believe maybe we can connect or maybe introduce something new that most of you have not heard of. So my first thing that I will talk about, while I was doing this paper, I came across something called voter apathy. I know most of you are aware of that. If you're not, it kind of means maybe lack of interest by eligible voters to go and participate in voting. Now, when I was doing this paper, I was thinking as a youth, the way people are talking about voter apathy, there's more to it than the prima facie, because while I was at home, my friends and I, we were very vocal during the campaign period. We were going at road trips for our MP. Yeah, I come from Kikuyu sub-constituency. We were going for these campaigns and whatever. And now, when it came now to cast the vote, down to casting the vote, I noticed a large number of us, they were silent on that part. Many of us were missing. And it got me thinking, what could have been the particular reason for this? And one thing I found out was misrepresentation. Mostly in the political arena of Kenya, age has no limit. There's no exit queue for politics. So now we tend to see the older generation. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but misrepresentation and also politics, they need to match changing times. So when as a youth, you see people at the forefront, they don't reflect who you are. You will be you'll tend to shun from that because you don't feel like your preferences, they will be articulated by that particular group because they don't reflect on you. So my main point was misrepresentation, that the youth are mostly misrepresented in the leadership roles. And no, I'm not just talking about the MCA, because now when you start vying for these big seats, you usually be told, no, just start small, and then you'll get the grip, you'll get a hang of it. But now, we have to know that now the Gen Z, they're coming of age, and we cannot imagine, or we cannot overlook their importance and their contribution to the society. They are in every aspect of the society. So we need to represent the youth more. And also my second point on voter apathy, I was thinking technology. Now there is a lot of proliferation of technology in social, political, and economic lives. So now when most of the youth, they are the greatest consumers of technology. And now when something like voting, yes, as basic as it is, I was thinking it's supposed to be kind of incorporated into something to do with technology, because there is no way, if I as a youth, I will relate more to technology. I'll find my research there. My friends are online, my work, sometimes I work from home online, and then now it comes down to voting, and now you have to tell me I have to go even though the polling stations are not always so far, now we have to go there, and then I'll start to have a problem. I'm a Gen Z, you will understand me. I need everything to be done how I like it, pragmatic in a way. Yes, so, and then I'll proceed to another reason for why there was a low turnout in this just concluded election was the high cost of living. Now, I'm aware, most of us, we know that we felt the aftermath of COVID and global inflation. It was undeniable. Now, the food and fuel prices, they skyrocketed. Even getting only cash to buy maize, it was tough. it was tough. And now when, sorry, pardon me. When the economy tends to be high, most people tend to abscond or shun away from voting because they feel that they're not like what they have in mind. The leaders are not implementing it. So if voting is not a basic requirement, they will tend to shun away. And mostly if the demographic profile of the citizens of Kenya, most of them are unemployed. And if you're not unemployed, you're maybe in the informal sector, which brings little to the table. Now you'll be tempted to go and hustle the normal one. Instead of voting, it won't be a requirement. It won't be like something you have to do. And also, these elections tend to come in the midst where our country is experiencing, even now, a persistent drought. Now we all saw the behavior of our politicians when they went to maybe stopovers at this strike hit, maybe drought heated, and people are starving there. The stopovers there are usually very brief, and maybe some helicopters, maybe somewhere there, but they're usually very brief. And not to people in such areas, voting will also not be a requirement, like a fundamental thing to do at that time. Now what I'm posing in my discourse of my paper is we have the law there, we have the Election Act, we have the Constitution, we have the Election Offences Act, but still people are not participating as expected in voting. They're not coming out in numbers. In every election, we need to see an upsurge in the number of voters, but this election there was a decline in the registered voters and also the people who came out to vote. Now maybe there is maybe we should ask ourselves if there is a problem with maybe our legislations. Are they practical, or maybe we have formulated them in a way that they are not in sync with what is happening on the ground? That's why it's becoming like a tug of war, because up there, the Bill of Rights is thriving, and then now down here, when it comes to implementation, there is little to show in that part. So what I was recommending for this is maybe we need to repackage citizen participation or civic education in a way that it will reflect on the youth preferences, because the youth tend to like things which are short and brief and maybe captivating. So instead of showing politics coming out as boring, we need to repackage it in a way that it is creative, it will appear to the youth to make them come out in numbers, because we cannot tend to ignore their influence in these modern times. They're increasing and they demand attention, not just require. And also, another recommendation, maybe voter education should start at the genesis of every election period. Yes, it's usually done, but it's mostly done during the last months of election and campaign. And now people are lost in the frenzy of campaign. So they won't tend to maybe know how to go about it. Voter education, it has more to it, because now when you educate them, it gives, how can I put it? When you educate the youth, mostly, it's kind of you're giving them the power, you're making them see the power that they have in voting, to understand the gravity of voting. It's not just casting a mere vote, it is a fundamental requirement that is enshrined in our Constitution. And with that, I would like to end with the maybe dangers of non-participation and neutrality towards democracy. Neutrality is just maybe choosing not to be affiliated to one party or decision. Yes, I understand, even though maybe the parties may, or the candidates who are present may not reflect your ideologies, there is need to participate in election vote, because when you fail to vote in other way, it's like the other side of the coin. When you fail to vote, you're voting in the person that you don't want. So it's upon us to maybe sensitize the youth more and also repackage our legislations and maybe how we interact with the youth to make them see the importance of voting. Yeah, thank you. That will be all.
Asante sana. Next up, Unyango Aaron Okoth, Wahu Wangari. Are you here? Karibu. 10 minutes.
Hi, good morning. Okay, I respond to Wahu Wangari, and I'll be taking less time because my counterpart is supposed to do more. So yeah, I understand we were supposed to do a presentation yesterday, but if you've been to Bogani Institute, which I believe most of you have been, you know that school along Langata South Road? Yeah, can change your plans. But I'm glad I'm here. So before I start, I'm not an expert in anything electoral justice or decoloniality, but I'm glad Dr. Ogada is here. And not an expert in anything really at this point of my life. But democracy, if you've been to a polling station school, I know most of you didn't go there. You went to Braeburn, Brookhouse. But for those of us who are in polling station schools, we tend to link democracy to what Abraham Lincoln told us, that democracy is a government for the people, by the people, and of the people. But when I read certain African philosophical-based books, like Kwasi Wiredu's books and Uchenna Okeja's books, I would like to define democracy maybe as a government for the majority, by the majority, and of the majority. So before I get into the state of our democracy and where we've come from, maybe it's good to look at before colonialism came, where were we as a people, mostly in Africa. So some of these authors I've quoted, Kwasi talks about the Akan in Ghana and the consensual democracy that existed there, where there was monarchical democracy, but there was also consensus, because even in countries where it was mostly a kinship-based system of governance, you ought to have the consensus of your council of elders before a decision was passed. And this is also true when we come down to Kenya. People like Dr. Reginald Odwor of the University of Nairobi, I was told I have to say the University of Nairobi, talks about the Luo people in Kenya and how they also had a kinship-based system of governance. I understand, I don't know if I'll butcher this, but the government in Toluo is called Pinyo Wacho, yeah, which means the community has spoken. So the consensual aspect of democracy also comes out, and the Ameru also had the Njorin Cheke, and my people, the Agekoyo, we had also a kinship-based, a chief-based, kinship-based form of governance that was also consensual-based. Our pillars of the government were Oromwe and Wedani. I saw Francis Bongi somewhere, I hope I also didn't butcher that, which means unity in oneness in community and love. So Kwasi also proposes and asks the question, are democracies in Africa failing, or are we tainted with these things that we call corruption, discontentment, and all these things that we experience? Are they failing because our democracies have been consolidated with colonial perceptions of democracy? Do we need to move from the constitutional or liberal democracies, which are characterized by a system of separation of powers, and into consensus democracy? And some people have raised arguments and said that this is not viable because culture is evolving, it keeps changing, and we have changed as a people. But what can be done? Because We know that good governance is characterized by the rule of law, consensus, transparency, accountability, and it has to be effective. But in Kenya, the situation is that our kind of democracy and electoral process is characterized by partisan politics that evolve around ethnic origins, regional affiliations, religious beliefs. If I'm a Muslim, if I'm Christian, I'm voting on this basis. So Gabriel Oguda, who I know most of us know, wrote a satirical paper on, I don't know if it was the Standard or Daily Nation, saying that chapter 6 is dead, and she was the loving mother to most of us who love the rule of law. Because, and I think this is the position of most of the youths in Kenya. Thank you. Because as most of you have tried to say that the youth in Kenya are voter apathetic. But I don't see, okay, I'm a youth, I'm part of the Gen Z, and I think we are not voter apathetic. Maybe this is a protest. People want change, and how is this change going to stem from us? You know, if you're African, all of us are African, every time you go and complain to your parents, maybe mom, I call my mom, you don't understand. They always say, sasa unataka nini? What do you want from me? And I think the youth in Kenya, or as my mom calls us, my mom doesn't say Gen Z, she says Subaru, Yamambaru generation. How she listened to that song, I don't know. But maybe this Subaru is coming with some form of positive change. What does the youth want? What do we as a people want? Should we change our political systems to align with our communistic view or humanist view of who we are, or what will we do? So I don't know what this Subaru Yamambaru is coming with, but Aaron is going to tell us tunakuja na nini. Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to thank my colleague for that opener. And in the interest of time, I shall avoid tangents. That also means I'll have to avoid telling the very funny joke I had slated, but you can see me later for that. So the crux of our argument is, now that we have established that these issues do exist and this current system is not working, what is the way forward? And we go back to basics. I'd like to take us back to the basics. Democracy. What is democracy? What many of us term as democracy, and what many self-described democratic countries state is democracy, is what is believed to have started in Athens. But when we carefully investigate what happened in Athens, for instance, Robert Dahl tells us that most Greek city-states had a large percentage of slaves, some up to 50% of the population. And of the remaining 50% in some states, in some Greek city-states, females were not allowed to vote. And of the males that were allowed to vote, they had to own property. This already reduces the population of people who can participate in voting, which is one of the bedrocks of democracy, being a smaller, rather a minority of the population. When we go over to ancient Rome, the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire, we find that the body tasked with making the decisions that impacted on the affairs of the state was the Senate. And the Senate was populated by the academic elite and the wealthiest people in the state. But this was not intended to be to the detriment of the larger population. We can observe that the reasoning behind this was because of the assumption that the educated elite would be able to offer unbiased and impassionate opinions. They would be able to offer voting points that are based on purely factual or logical reasoning. And on the other hand, the wealthiest people who had their fate intertwined with the fate of the state would have it in their best interest to pick a position where the state would survive, and in turn, their own wealth would survive. The best example of this is the first triumvirate that consisted of Gaius Julius Caesar, Pompey Magnus, and Marcus Crassus. We have on one hand Marcus Crassus, a very wealthy Roman, interested in making the best deal for himself and ensuring that no other citizen in the entire republic would be as wealthy as he is. On the other hand, we have Julius Caesar, an upcoming politician intent on building public goodwill. This is through construction projects and basically making the public happy. And we also have Pompey Magnus, who was interested in maintaining his popularity and fame among the veterans of Rome, the legionnaires. When these three people were in power or worked together, they balanced each other out and ensured that no single party had their way. And in turn, the best results or the most optimal results were realized. And as I conclude, how is this applicable in the Kenyan system? We've already mentioned, some of us who have spoken before me have mentioned something to their ends that the current system is staggered such that is swayed such that it's a winner-take-all system. But imagine a system where, for instance, a real estate magnate or a media mogul, for instance, is in a council making decisions on who is to be president, who is to lead the government. In the same council, we have another media mogul. That is, mean that each of them will act as a counter towards each other, ensuring that none of them gets an unfairly advantageous position, as opposed to the current system where one can back one politician and the other backs another, and depending on who wins, they will be the beneficiaries, sole beneficiaries, and the other will be forced or relegated to the sidelines for the next 5 years, along with the 5,000 plus employees who are dependent upon them. So, as I close, we propose, as we shall in our final draft, that it is time for us to move to a system where people who are unbiased, people who are unmoved by political rhetoric like Tibim, but people who observe the logic in an argument, the practicality of an argument or of a proposed leadership style, and the people who have the most to lose to be the people who are entitled, or rather, the people who are accorded the responsibility to vote. Thank you.
Indeed, the future of law is in good hands. The clarity in rhetoric and speech. Waho, you're going places. Thank you very much. It is the University of Nairobi. Robert Mutembe, where are you? Robert Mutembe, it's politically not correct to say that here. Who is from Nairobi? Definitely, of course.
Good morning. I had prepared a PowerPoint, but my laptop malfunctioned at the last minute. So Kyoko is doubting whether that one is true. And well, I'm presenting on a topic I have titled The Political Parties Fund, a Tool for Democracy or a Cash Cow. And as will be evidenced in my paper, I argue that the current model of political parties funding under the Political Parties Act has been reduced to what I call a cash cow, and has mainly benefited a few people among the political elite. It has not met the objectives that are set out under Section 26 of the Political Parties Act. And for that reason, there is a need to reconsider the model of political parties funding from public funds. And I will discuss some recommendations and what I view as a solution in the model of financing as captured in the Act. So maybe having set out that as the argument in the paper, let me try to convince you. I know perhaps we have come across news recently showing how political parties have benefited from public funds. I don't know whether there is someone here who was concerned about the amounts of money that are being pocketed by political parties. And given the nature of political parties in Kenya, we could easily summarize and conclude that that money is ending in the pockets of a few people. We know that the nature of political parties in Kenya is such that major parties are associated with key personalities. We do not have political parties driven by ideologies, and even the model of funding under the Political Parties Act is based on promotion of numbers. And the Act distributes the funds based on the number of votes and the number of seats that the political party attained in the preceding election. I find that interesting because the model uses the preceding election to determine the distribution of funds, yet the objectives are to help the party in making its manifesto visible during the campaign period. So it's a kind of a reimbursement of some sort where we are funding the parties after the fact, but that is not the main point. The main point here is that there are certain objectives set out in the Act, and these objectives which informed the inclusion of political parties fund mainly focus on promotion of certain objectives which include promotion of participation of special interest groups, persons living with disability, and other such objectives which are clearly spelled out under Section 26 of the Political Parties Act. Now, if you look at those objectives and the money that the parties are given, there is a disconnect. I argue that there has not been a contribution of that fund to the achievement of these objectives set out in the Act. And if the model of financing is based on numbers, rather than testing the impact of the political parties and testing the achievement of those objectives, then we will still not have any change and any contribution of the fund to the achievement of those objectives. So then I am not discrediting the provisions that are funding political parties. I am not arguing that we should not fund political parties. I am arguing that the model of funding that is there currently and the objectives that informed the need for that funding have a disconnect. And there is need then to reconsider the model that is being used and to look at how we distribute public funds to political parties and how we audit the money that is used by those particular parties. Now, a few reflections on the current administration of the political parties fund. Some of the observations I have made, one is that the current model does not encourage the growth of small parties. It is inclined to favor dominant parties, and while at that we know that the nature of politics in Kenya and the nature of political parties in Kenya is such that these dominant parties are associated with key personalities, such that if that person is not in the party is dead. So how do we then come up with a model that would favor small parties that may have meaningful contribution in the society and which may be genuine and perhaps if promoted, they could bring a change in the society? If we stick to numbers and giving parties funding merely based on numbers, then they will do all that is possible for them to get those numbers. And we also know that those numbers are largely influenced by our ethnic voting blocks. So that there is a problem with a model that promotes numbers. That was the first observation. The second observation is that there is a problem in how the audit of the fund is done. The current audit is merely financial. It is done by the Office of the Auditor General. And if you look at the last report, the Auditor General just says that she was satisfied that the funds were used to achieve the objectives that were meant to achieve, but you then wonder how that was measured. So if we are merely looking at paperwork to audit political parties, yet they are using huge amounts of public funds, considering the situation we are in as a country, then we will not keep getting the objectives that were initially envisioned. And then I propose that there needs to be a departure from financial audit to include an element of social audit, such that we are able to measure the impact of these political parties and the achievement of those particular objectives that are set out in the Act. The other observation I make is that the fund looked at through an economic lens raises a problem. There is a conflict between economic objectives and civil and political objectives. The objective of attaining civil and political rights. And I argue then that for a country like Kenya that is struggling economically, then is it justified to use huge amounts of money to fund political parties whose impact is not properly felt and which has largely been reduced to a box-ticking activity whereby political parties will be compliant on paper, but not compliant in reality. As I conclude, I know my time is up. Just to give an example, political parties funding was meant to promote representation of women and participation of women in politics. But we are still grappling with the issue of 2/3 gender rule, despite having spent a lot of money funding political parties from taxpayers' money. So there needs to be also an inclusion of private funding so that parties are not merely representing, relying on public funds. You will see my paper for more details. I will stop at that. I can see Uganda is looking at me.
We are expecting one more presentation. If he does appear, we will be able to slot him for his time. But if he's not ready, we go to the questions. He's joining, huh? As we prepare for Alvin, prepare your questions. Identify the speaker, prepare the questions so that we save on time. Are we ready with Alvin? There's no one, huh? So as we wait for Alvin, can I see the questions? Maswali. Yeah, start posing them. Speakers, note down your respective questions. We will have time to answer. I start from this side. Mr. Luani. Microphone iko wapi? Aya, maswali mafupi.
Thank you. Two short questions. My first question is to Valerie. I listened to your presentation. I don't know if I heard you mention voters of unsound mind. Voters of unsound mind. How do you go about assisting these voters of unsound mind? Second question is to Mr. Mutembei. Mr. Mutembei, I also have a problem with the financial model of the Political Parties Act. I remember an instance in 2017. Mr. Mutembei, I remember an incident in 2017 where there was a wrangle in the NASA coalition. I'm addressing Mr. Mutembei, and there was a wrangle in the NASA coalition about this distribution of these funds. I just wanted to know from you, are these funds meant for parties or coalitions? And was ODM justified in 2017 to lock out Ford Kenya and the Wiper Party from receiving these funds? Thank you.
Asante sana. Are we ready with Alvin? Okay, as we get ready with Alvin, I saw another hand. So those were your questions, Mutembei. Ladies first. Wacha nianze kwa shemeji yangu hapa.
Thank you, Shemeji. My question goes to, first of all, let me say I am quite impressed, as I'm sure everybody is, at the kind of papers that the kind of presentations that have been made by the young people today. It's thoroughly impressive. This goes out to my dear friend Wahu and Onyango, and also to Pauline Duta. The whole discussion about the youth. Wahu asked a very good question. Are the youth apathetic, or is it a protest? I wish you to answer that question.
Okay, the youth's pathetic. Okay. Yes, sir. Somebody help us with the microphone.
Thank you. My question goes to my Gen Z speaker. Where is she? How are you? I have a question from you. For you. Someone sent me the question online. Let me get to it. And the person is asking, and I'll ask on his behalf, that, okay, this is what he says. Online voting is okay, but the winner will be anyway, they'll be hacked. And so he's asking, what do you think? Should we consider blockchain secured voting? I don't know if you know what is blockchain, but if you related to that, you'll have to deal with that. And then I'll go to Mr. Mtembei. You've talked so well about political funding. My question will be, what do you think, Mr. Mtembei, because you've said that the funding relies on the numbers of the previous election. Should we have a cap or a clause to limit political parties that this funding will only be there if the parties exist in the future? Because we have a nature of political parties in Kenya not lasting one election. Thank you.
Asante sana. Is there any other question behind that? Yes,
Thank you very much. Those were very impressive presentations. Yes, my question is like a comment question. Yes, I'm actually looking at my friend Valerie and your presentation, and also connecting with the presentations which have been made here, including yesterday and the day before, about women participation in politics, because it's all about inclusion, acceptance, and all these things, and persons with disabilities, and all these other marginalized. And the issue, my comment comes with a proposal. No, I am borrowing from Neka's building on the indigenous. She actually proposes a neo-feminist approach to African feminism, which is about looking at what really matters to the people. What do people consider their authentically important to them? And I usually think that is a very good thing in terms, because nego means negotiation. I think, even though we are looking at law, yes, we can include nego-feminism in the law, and that's, I think, there's public participation. But I think most of these issues, they won't be won on law only. We must really embrace nego in our social approach to these issues. And so I don't know, but the question is, have you looked at that are you considering that in your paper in terms of approaches? Because we really have to agree that law cannot solve all. Thank you.
Asante sana. I presume my friend Alvin is here. We are ready, Alvin? Are we ready? Aye, Tundele. Alvin, you and I know each other, so 10 minutes, exactly.
Evans, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Tuendelee.
Nasikika, eh?
We can hear you.
Thank you very much. For the audience, my name is Alvin Koske. I am an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. Briefly, my presentation relates to the protection of the voters' data that is provided in the context of presidential election nominations. Now, in the process of determining
recording in progress,
who should be qualified to vie as a presidential candidate, IBC is required under Regulation 18(2)C to do certain things. Specifically, the contestant required to submit a list of supporters numbering 2,000 from a majority of the counties, that is at least 20. Other than that list of supporters, which definitely must be signed for purposes of verification, the candidates are also required to present copies of IDs of these supporters. Now, you and I would know in the country that we live in today that there have been increased cases of identity theft and bank fraud, which arises from where somebody's ID, name, or identity is swapped by somebody else, and the person ends up losing money or something of value. Now, as the paper argues, there is nothing that has been provided for either in the law or by way of the regulations that under Section 109 of the Elections Act, the IBC is mandated to produce to regulate how this data is collected, how it is handled, and whatnot. Section 2 of the Data Protection Act actually defines personal data to include anything that can be, that has the capacity to identify a person. So because of that, I argue that since this sensitive data is being collected by IBC and as provided for under Article 31 of the Constitution, this data must be protected and handled in a proper way. There is nothing in the context of presidential election nominations that has been given to protect, ensure that this data is used properly. Other than that, Regulation 18(2)C, Regulations 24, 28, and 36 also provide a requirement that anybody who is contesting respectively for position of National Assembly, Senate, and County Assembly must provide, again, similarly, though the numbers vary, names, signatures, and ID copies. Which then brings me to the heart of the paper that I am presenting, that is the risk that is the persons are exposed to. Now, because, as you can see from that, from 24 counties and 1,000 copies of IDs and signatures, this is essentially big data which, under the Data Protection Act, the law provides that it can't just be handled the way you would handle data. And because then there are risks that arise in this context, there is need to have that the persons who are handling, either the contestants, the political parties, or IBC, find a way of securing this data. In my reading of the law, the regulations, the Elections Act, and case law, there is no provision as it stands right now to guide how this collection, number one, should be done, who should be the person who is handling or storing these copies of IDs. And essentially because of that, then we find ourselves in a situation where because this ID is personally identifying a person, and number two, it can also tell you, because from those lists, we can know where you are voting, where you are domiciled. There is a risk that is involved by virtue of that. Now, my paper argues that since there is no provision in law or regulations under the Elections Act or guidelines that have been given as officers by IBC to guide the handling of this data, then we are left with a lacuna that must be filled somehow. It is true that in future we may have the regulations amended to close regular gaps, but then as it stands now, where do we go? Because essentially the law provides for a right, it provides for the requirement that when you are collecting data, you must get the consent of the data. You must ensure that when you collect this data, the same is put in a secure place or is stored where the person who is storing has responsibility for it and cannot allow illegal access. Then what we do? Now, when we were doing the election nominations before the general election that we just did in 2022, I was privileged to handle a petition, that is a Free Kenya Initiative versus IBC and others, where the court actually said that indeed it is true that even if the IBC would want to make it look like there are no risks involved or they can handle the data that is given in the manner that I have explained, there is need to ensure that before you even get there, can we do a data impact assessment. Now, when we do the data impact assessment, we will elaborate on the risks that are involved, and we'll also be able to say, for instance, then, as required by the Data Protection Act, that there should be a data protection officer for anybody who handles data. We should appoint either for the party or the candidate or for IBC that this person should be responsible for this data, and they should ensure that it is handled in this particular way. Now, that decision did not go beyond providing for the requirement legally that IBC should ensure that a data impact assessment is done. That was the end of it, and as it stands, actually, it was appealed, and it is in abeyance in the Court of Appeal. But there are many other things that are still outstanding. Like I've said, we don't know then. For instance, as I know most of the participants in this conference are, you are aware that when I give an original and you make a copy of that original, in this context, the ID, goes with it if they are to legitimize the fact that what you have is a copy of the ID. The same should be certified or either by an advocate or somebody who has the authority to do that in law. As it stands now, we don't know how that certification can be done. We also don't know, there is no provision in law on how the collection should be done. There is no requirement that has been placed by IBC on the political parties to ensure that as they collect, they will collect it in a particular way. There is no requirement to ensure that by the time they are coming to assess whatever has been collected from the contestants, there is no way of checking that actually that the consent of the people who gave those copies of IDs was actually present at the time of collection as required by the Data Protection Act. We also don't know how the contestants or the parties are meant to handle that data. So the paper argues that since there are still gaps and risks that need to be addressed, then as was the case in the case of Free Kenya Initiative versus the IBC, then we can still use public interest litigation to handle those things that are still outstanding before then the law catches up by way of amendment. Basically, that's what the paper is about. I will stop there because I've been told my time is up. Thank you.
Asante sana, Alvin. Thank you very much. I am guided that we need to handle tea business kwanza. Sindio, Mr. Kioko? Yeah, the right to food is important. So I'm told, let's go take tea. And while you're taking tea, tuanze kufikiria the theme for next year. The theme for this year was elections. So next year, what are we dealing with? Let's start brainstorming and comparing notes. We will deal with that after we come back from tea and as we answer those questions that were posed. Asanteni sana.